There is a street in this story. You know the kind of street, the kind that exists in every African city, that one particular road in that one particular neighborhood where the money is old and the cars are new, and the buildings are the kind of buildings that make you feel, without anyone saying anything, that you do not belong here, that your presence is tolerated rather than welcomed, that the space between where you are standing and where the people inside those buildings live is not measured in meters, but in something much larger and much harder to cross. This street had a name, but for the people who grew up near it, who drove past it, who pressed their faces briefly against its possibility and then kept walking, it was simply known as the kind of street you looked at and understood. You understood that other people lived there. Not you. There is also a boy in this story. He is not remarkable to look at. He is 18 years old, and his shoes are the kind of shoes that have been repaired so many times that calling them the original shoes is a philosophical question. He has a white shirt that is not quite white anymore, and trousers that are clean despite everything, because his mother ironed them last night with the specific care of a woman who knows that what her son presents to the world is the only thing she can still give him. He drives a taxi. Not his taxi, someone else's taxi, rented by the day for an amount that leaves very little after fuel and the return to the owner. He drives in the rich area of the city because that is where the fares are. That is where the airport routes come from. That is where the money is, even if the money never quite reaches him. And the people in that rich area, the people who get into his taxi with their good shoes and their clean accents and their phones that cost more than his parents' house, those people sometimes laugh at the way he speaks. His English is not perfect. His accent is the accent of a boy who grew up in a village where the teacher also didn't always have the best English, and who learned from books that were missing pages, and who practiced by speaking to himself in a room where nobody could hear him, because he was already too ashamed to speak in front of anyone else. They laughed at him. One of them laughed at him on a Tuesday afternoon and said something, one precise, perfectly delivered, casually cruel sentence, and something in the boy broke. But here is what the person who laughed did not know. They did not know that they were not breaking him. They were breaking the last thing that was holding him to the life he had been living. They were, without understanding it, giving him the gift of rage. And rage, in the right hands, in the hands of someone who knows what hunger is, who knows what ironed trousers and worn shoes are, who knows what it is to watch your parents come home from a field with nothing left in their bodies and still find a way to make something for dinner. Rage in those hands is not a destructive force. It is a fuel. And the boy in this story was about to fill up the tank. They laughed at the taxi driver's accent. Then he bought the whole street. This is how it happened, and why it happened, and what it cost, and what it was worth. Stay right here, because this story starts at the bottom of everything and ends somewhere you did not see coming. Stay right here. Like this video right now if you believe that every person who ever laughed at someone's accent made a mistake they will regret. Subscribe to Tribal Tales Hub and ring that notification bell. We tell the stories that make you remember who you are. Comment below. Has anyone ever laughed at the way you speak? Tell us what happened. We are reading every comment. His name was Kofi Mensah. He was born in 1999 in a small farming village called Akyem, 23 kilometers outside of Kumasi in the Ashanti region of Ghana. Akyem was the kind of place that appeared on government maps, but not on the kind of maps that people used to find things, the kind of maps that mattered. It had one primary school, one church, one provision store that was also the gathering place for village announcements, and approximately 400 people who had, for various reasons, not yet left. The reasons people stayed in Akyem were mostly the same reasons people stayed in any small place: roots, responsibility, the specific inertia of a life already arranged around particular geography. You had your farm. You had your relatives. You had the church where your mother's mother was buried and where you would probably be buried too, and this continuity felt on most days like enough. Kofi's father was named Kweku Mensah. He was 41 when Kofi was born, a late fatherhood, arrived at after years of working the small piece of inherited farmland that produced enough of the right things in the right seasons and not quite enough in the wrong ones. Kweku was a solid, slow-speaking man whose face had been carved by decades of outdoor work into something that looked like a landscape. Every line had a weather event behind it. He grew cassava, yam, and plantain. He kept 3 goats. He was known in Akyem as a man who paid his debts and kept his word and did not speak unless he had something to say, which meant that when he spoke, people listened. Kofi's mother was named Abina. She was 38 when Kofi was born, and she was, in every measurable way, the engine of the Mensah household. She woke at 4:30 in the morning, before the birds, before the light, before anything, and she began the day's work. Water from the pump, fire started, the morning's cooking, the preparation of whatever they were taking to the Kumasi market that week. She sold vegetables, dried fish, occasionally fabric when she had been able to acquire some at the right price. She managed the household income with the precision of a person for whom every sadi was a decision, not a given. They loved each other. This was clear and simple and not performed. The Mensahs did not have the kind of love that required expression, because it was the kind that was simply present in every arrangement of their lives. The way Kweku always left the good portion of whatever they had for Abina. The way Abina saved the warmest spot at the fire without being asked. The way they moved around each other in the small house with the easy geography of 2 people who have shared a space so long that their movements are choreographed without intention. They had 1 child. They had tried for more. This was a grief they carried quietly between them, in the way couples carry the things they do not speak about publicly because the village has opinions and they have already given the village enough to have opinions about. 1 child, Kofi. He arrived, the story Abina told him every year on his birthday, with the same details in the same order, in the early hours of a Thursday morning, in November, in the same room where Abina had grown up, delivered by the same old woman who had delivered half of Akyem's current population. He arrived, she said, with his eyes already open, wide open, looking at everything. You came into the world like you were already late, she always said, with the smile she reserved for this story. He did not come into the world like it owed him anything. He came into the world like he was going to find out what it had and take stock. Growing up in Akyem was growing up inside scarcity, not the dramatic scarcity of crisis, not hunger that threatened, not poverty that destroyed. The steady, manageable, grinding scarcity of a family that had exactly what was needed on the good days and slightly less than that on the others. The scarcity that makes you understand, very young, the specific weight of money, what it costs to produce, how quickly it goes, how differently the world treats the people who have enough of it. Kofi understood this by the time he was 8. He understood it in the way that children understand things that adults have been living with for years. Suddenly and completely, all at once, the way a picture becomes visible. He had gone to school in Kumasi for a day trip with a church group. It was his first time in the city. He was 8 years old and the city was, he had no words for it then and still struggled for them years later. It was volume. Volume of people, of movement, of color, of noise, of things. There were buildings that disappeared upward into more building. There were cars that were clean. There were people who walked like they expected the road to get out of their way. And there were shops. Shops with glass fronts. Shops with things in the windows that cost amounts Kofi knew his father would not earn in a month. Shops whose interiors were lit like something important was happening inside them permanently. He pressed his face against one of those glass windows. Inside, shoes, rows of them, more shoes than he had seen in his life, arranged with the care of a museum exhibit. He looked at those shoes for a long time. Then he looked at his own feet. He was wearing what he always wore, sandals made from rubber tire cut and strapped by his father, practical, effective, not shoes. He looked at the glass front shoes and then at his own feet, and he felt something that he would later, as an adult with the vocabulary for it, understand was not envy exactly. It was something more precise than envy. It was information. It was the confirmation, clear, specific, physically felt, that there were two different versions of the world operating simultaneously in the same city, and that which version you lived in was determined by something, and that the something could perhaps be changed. He went back to Akyem that evening. He said nothing to his parents about what he had seen, but he began thinking, in the way that 8-year-olds who have just received a significant piece of information begin thinking, obsessively, repeatedly, from every angle, the way you turn an object in your hand to see all its surfaces. School was the obvious answer. His parents believed in school with the specific, unironic faith of people who understand, from the bottom, what knowledge means in a world that charges for everything. They had sacrificed to send him to the village school, and when he was 11 they managed, through a combination of savings, a small loan from Abina's brother in Kumasi, and the sale of one of the 3 goats, to enroll him in a junior secondary school in Kumasi, where the teachers were better and the books had all their pages. He lived with Abina's brother, Uncle Kofi Boateng, named Kofi also, which created confusion that the family navigated with the occasional use of Small Kofi and Big Kofi in Kumasi during the week and came home on weekends. Uncle Boateng was a mechanic who ran a small workshop in New Tafo and who received his nephew with the practical warmth of a man who understood family obligation and took it seriously without making a performance of it. He gave Kofi a mattress in the workshop's small office room. He fed him. He asked about school with genuine interest. He did not ask for anything back. Kofi was in school the specific type of student that good teachers recognize and mediocre teachers find difficult. He was not the fastest, not the most naturally gifted, not the student who made things look effortless. He was the student who stayed, who reread, who asked questions that suggested he had gone away and thought about the previous answer before coming back for the next one. He was in every study group he could find. He borrowed textbooks from students who would not need them at night. He learned things the way his father farmed, with patience and repetition, and the understanding that you do not get the harvest without the consistent daily work. English was his struggle. His mother tongue was Twi. The household language was Twi. Akyem was Twi. Even Uncle Boateng in the evenings defaulted to Twi. English, which the school taught and which the textbooks were written in, and which the aspirational version of the world that Kofi was orienting himself toward operated in, English was a second skin that did not quite fit. He could read it reasonably well. Writing was harder. Speaking was hardest of all, the specific difficulty of a language learned from text rather than conversation, the way it lived in your head as something correct, but came out of your mouth as something else. The accent was the particular accent of someone who had assembled the language from its components rather than absorbed it as a whole. His classmates, who had grown up in Kumasi with more English in their environment, sometimes laughed. Not cruelly mostly. The specific laughter of children who notice something funny without calculating the cost. But laughter is laughter, and the cost was the same regardless of the intention. He learned, by the time he was 14, to speak as little as possible in English in front of people he didn't fully trust. He also learned to listen. Listening, he discovered, was an extraordinarily good substitute for speaking. If you were quiet, people talked. If they talked, they told you things. If you paid attention to the things they told you, you learned things that no textbook contained. He sat in the workshop while Uncle Boateng worked and he listened to mechanics talk about cars. He sat in the market while Abina sold and he listened to traders negotiate. He sat in churches and listened to people describe their lives. He accumulated information the way his mother saved money, steadily, carefully, without waste. When he was 16, his junior secondary ended. The question of senior secondary was a conversation he had with his parents on a Sunday when he came home from Kumasi. They sat in the small house, him on the wooden bench, his father in the only proper chair, his mother on a stool she'd brought from the kitchen, and they went through the numbers together. The numbers did not work. The school fees, the accommodation in Kumasi, the books, the uniform, the transport. When you added it all up and measured it against what the farm produced and what the market generated, there was a gap, not a small gap. The kind of gap that, when you looked at it clearly, you understood was not going to close without something changing significantly. Kofi looked at his parents' faces during this conversation. His father's face, which showed nothing because he had trained himself to show nothing, but whose jaw had the particular tension of a man holding something difficult. His mother's face, which showed everything because she could not help it. She was looking at him with the specific expression of a woman who is about to fail her child and who knows it is not her fault and who also knows that this does not change anything. He said, "It's okay, I'll find another way." His mother said, "Kofi." "Mama," he said, "I'll find another way, I promise." His father said nothing. He nodded once, the nod of a man who knows his son has said something true. Kofi came back to Kumasi, and he found the way he had promised to find. Uncle Boateng knew a man who had several taxis. The man's name was Mr. Asante, Emmanuel Asante, 50 years old, a round-faced, sharp-eyed man who had built a modest fleet of 5 vehicles that he rented to drivers by the day. The arrangement was standard. You paid him a fixed daily rate for the car, you kept what remained after fuel, and you returned the car in the condition you received it. The rate was high enough that on slow days you went home with almost nothing. On good days, if the airport route worked out and the fares were generous, you went home with something real. Kofi was 17 when he first drove for Mr. Asante. He was a good driver. This was not a boast, it was an assessment. Uncle Boateng had taught him to drive in the workshop's yard and on the streets of New Tafo from the age of 14, and the mechanic's approach to machinery, understanding it, maintaining it, respecting what it could and could not do, had translated into driving that was smooth and careful and attentive. He did not rush the car. He did not take risks that were not necessary. He was the kind of driver that passengers, if they were paying attention, noticed subconsciously and felt comfortable with. But Kumasi was not a city where drivers were treated with the respect their skills deserved. Kumasi had a hierarchy, and in that hierarchy, a taxi driver occupied a specific position below the people he drove, in a relationship of service that was sometimes respectful and sometimes not, depending entirely on who had gotten into the back seat. Kofi began driving the Kumasi-Accra route. Then the airport runs. The airport runs were better money but required the specific geography of Kotoka International Airport in Accra, and Kofi, who was 17 and new to the Accra roads, had to learn them fast. He did. He drove wealthy people. He drove business people with laptops. He drove families with expensive suitcases. He drove expats in good clothes who spoke to each other in English while sitting in his back seat as if he were a piece of the car rather than a person in it. He drove Ghanaians who had been abroad and come back with the particular confidence of people who have been somewhere else and returned. He drove all of them, and he listened to them, and he learned more from 3 months of driving than he had learned in several years of school. He learned about business, about how deals worked, about what people worried about and what they were excited about and what they were trying to accomplish. He learned what questions people asked each other in the back of taxis when they thought they were private. He learned the vocabulary of money, not the vocabulary of his parents' money, the careful economy of a farming village, but the vocabulary of a different scale of money, the kind that moved in thousands and hundreds of thousands, and that was discussed with the particular casualness of people for whom it was the medium rather than the subject. He also learned in these months that his English was a problem. Not in the way it had been a problem in school, where it was an academic embarrassment. In the taxi, it was a professional problem. When he spoke to clients, when he had to explain a route, respond to a question, give a price, his accent and his grammatical uncertainty created a distance. He could see it happen in real time, the slight repositioning of a passenger's face, the slight cooling of the interaction, the moment when the backseat relationship went from comfortable to slightly something else. He worked on it. At night, in Uncle Boateng's workshop office, he listened to English radio. He watched English YouTube videos on a borrowed phone. He repeated phrases until they sounded like something closer to what he heard. He was improving slowly, but improving. But the improvement was not fast enough for one particular Tuesday. The Tuesday was in October 2017. Kofi was 18 years old. He had done the morning airport run, a businessman from Accra going to the domestic terminal with a large bag and a phone that hadn't left his ear from the moment he got in to the moment he got out. The man had paid without looking at Kofi, the specific transaction of someone for whom the taxi was an infrastructure rather than an interaction. Kofi had then done 2 more fares, a family from the East Legon area going to a shopping mall, a woman going to a hospital in Ridge, before positioning himself at the airport residential area in the early afternoon, which was where the better Accra fares originated. The man who got into his taxi at 2:15 was named. Kofi didn't know this at the time, but would learn later, Kwame Asidu. He was 30-something. He was wearing clothes that Kofi recognized as expensive not because he had a frame of reference for the brands, but because of the specific quality of the fabric and the cut, the way expensive things communicate their price to people who have never bought anything at that price. He had a watch. He got in the back seat with the particular movement of a person who has gotten in and out of taxis enough times to have a system for it. He said the destination, an address in Labone. Kofi confirmed it. He pulled out. The first 10 minutes were quiet. Kofi drove. The radio was on low. He always kept it low because he had learned that passengers had different relationships with the radio and quiet was universally acceptable. The Accra traffic was the Accra traffic. Heavy, unpredictable, full of the small dramas of a city that has more vehicles than its roads were designed for. They hit a jam near the Nima Junction. Kofi took a diversion, a route he had learned in recent weeks that cut through a residential side street and came out further along the main road, past the jam. "That's not the right way," the man in the back said. "There is jam at Nima," Kofi said. "This way is shorter." A pause. "Your English is funny," the man said it, and here is the thing about the way it was said, the thing that Kofi would replay many times in the hours and days that followed casually. Not as a specific attack, not with calculation, the way you'd observe something unremarkable, the way you'd say, "There's a scratch on the dashboard," matter of fact, a small observation about a small thing. Kofi kept driving, his hands were on the wheel. "Where are you from?" the man asked. "Kumasi," Kofi said. "No, I mean originally. Your accent, it's like..." The man made a sound that was not quite a laugh but was in the same family. "Have you been to school?" Kofi's hands tightened on the wheel. "Yes," he said. His voice was perfectly level. He had practiced being level so many times. "Where?" He named the junior secondary in Kumasi. "Junior secondary," the man said, and there it was, the full sentence, delivered with the particular lightness of someone who didn't know or didn't care that each word in it had weight. "That explains the English." Kofi said nothing. They sat in traffic. "You should take some classes," the man said. He was on his phone now, half distracted, offering advice to a taxi driver the way you'd offer advice to a piece of furniture that had started trying to talk. "Your English, I mean, for this work. People want someone they can communicate with properly." Kofi drove. He drove the rest of the way to Labone in silence. The man in the back seat was entirely on his phone by this point, having made his observations and moved on. He had not registered that anything significant had occurred. For him, nothing significant had occurred. He got out at the Labon address. He paid the correct amount, no tip. He left without looking back. Kofi sat in the parked taxi for 7 minutes. He was very still. His hands were on the steering wheel. The radio was playing something, he didn't hear it. The street outside the window was going about its business. He didn't see it. He was doing something specific in those 7 minutes. He was taking the conversation he had just had and holding it up to the light and looking at it from every angle. Not the individual words, he was past the individual words. He was looking at the structure of it, the architecture, the particular configuration of power and assumption and casual dismissal that the conversation had contained. He was looking at where he fit in that architecture, where he currently fit, and where he intended to fit. After 7 minutes, he drove back toward the airport residential area. He was on the way when he made a decision. He didn't phone anyone. He didn't announce the decision. He simply, as he drove through Accra traffic with the afternoon sun on the windscreen, made a decision so complete and so certain that everything before it immediately reclassified itself as prologue. He was going to buy that street. Not that exact street. He wasn't specific yet, the specificity would come later. But the street, the idea of the street, the kind of street where the man in the back seat lived, the kind of street where Kofi was the taxi, not the passenger, the kind of street that existed in the world as a statement about which version of it you belonged to. He was going to buy it. He drove to Mr. Asant's office. He parked the taxi. He went inside and he put the keys on the desk and he said, very politely, that he was done for the day. Mr. Asant looked at the clock. It was 3 in the afternoon. "Something wrong?" he asked. "No," Kofi said. "I need to think." Mr. Asant, who was 50 and had seen a great many things and knew, from the look on this 18-year-old's face, that something had happened and that it was not an accident or a complaint but something else, simply nodded. "Come back when you've thought," he said. Kofi went back to Uncle Boateng's workshop. He went to his room. He closed the door. He sat on the edge of his mattress, and he began to write in the small notebook he kept for things he was thinking about. He wrote for 3 hours. He wrote everything that was in his head, all the anger and shame and humiliation, but also everything that had been building behind those feelings, observations he'd made from the back seat of his life, the conversations he'd overheard, the vocabulary of the money world he'd been ferrying around for months. He wrote about the shoes in the glass front shop when he was 8 years old. He wrote about the gap at the kitchen table when his parents did the numbers. He wrote about the man with the watch and the comment about his English. Then he started writing something different. He wrote, "What do I have?" He made a list. He could drive. He knew Accra's roads. He knew how the airport worked, who came through, where they went. He knew how to be quiet. He knew how to listen. He knew that he had been listening to wealthy people discuss business for months and had accumulated things that most people in his position would not have accumulated because most people in his position were not paying the kind of attention he was. He wrote, "What do I need?" He made another list. Better English. He wrote this first and underlined it twice. Not just better, good, genuinely good. The kind of English that the man in the back seat would have had nothing to say about. He wrote business. He wrote real estate. He stopped. He looked at what he had written. He had been listening to property conversations for months. He knew which developments were being built. He knew what people were paying. He knew who was buying and roughly what their budget was. He knew that the Accra property market was in a specific phase of development, growing fast, with buyers looking and sellers looking, and a gap between them that somebody had to fill. He wrote, "You don't need money to fill that gap. You need information and the ability to communicate it." He underlined this twice. Then he wrote, "So first, the English." He closed the notebook. He went back to Mr. Asant the next morning. He asked if he could keep driving, but differently. He explained what he wanted. He would only take the airport route, the East Legon route, the routes that gave him access to the most affluent passengers. He would use every fare as a training ground and a prospecting ground. He needed Mr. Asante to not object to him talking to his passengers. Mr. Asante looked at him. "What are you planning?" he asked. Kofi told him. Mr. Asante looked at him for a long time. "You're 18, he said. "Yes," Kofi said. "That is a very big plan." "Yes," Kofi said. Mr. Asante leaned back in his chair. He was 50 years old. He had also come from nothing. This was not something he had told Kofi, but it was visible in the way he looked at the 18-year-old in front of him, the specific recognition of one starting point in another. "The English," Mr. Asante said. "How are you going to fix the English?" "Practice," Kofi said. "In the car with customers and at night on my own." "How long?" 6 months, Kofi said, "maybe less." "What if customers complain?" "They won't," Kofi said. "I'll be polite. I'll be the best driver they've ever had. I'll be early and clean and careful and respectful, and by the time I'm done with their English, mine will be better." Mr. Asante looked at him for another moment. Then he laughed. It was a genuine laugh, not cruel. The laugh of a man who has just seen something he didn't expect. "Okay," Mr. Asante said, "drive." Her name was Amadarko. She was 19, a year older than Kofi, which she would mention occasionally with the specific authority of someone who considers a year an important detail. She was from Accra originally, from the Teshi area, third of 4 children in a family that was solidly working class. Her father drove a delivery truck. Her mother ran a seamstress business from their home. She was studying at the Ghana Institute of Management and Public Administration, GIMPA, on a partial scholarship, and she was paying for the rest of her fees through work, tutoring secondary school students in English and mathematics in the evenings and on weekends. She had a side arrangement with a contact she'd made through church, a man who provided English tutoring services to professionals who needed to improve their communication for business purposes. When the contact mentioned he had a new client, a young taxi driver who wanted to work on his English with the intensity and focus of someone who had a timeline. Ama's first reaction was practical. It was income, and she needed income. Her second reaction when she met the client was different. She met Kofi at a small cafe near the GIMPA campus on a Wednesday evening in November. He arrived first, she noted this, because late arrivals told you things. He was in clean clothes, not expensive but pressed, the way her mother pressed clothes. He had a notebook and a pen on the table. She sat down, she introduced herself, he introduced himself. "I understand you want to work on your English," she said. "Yes," he said. "What specifically?" He thought about it. "Speaking," he said. "Accent, the way I say things, I want to sound like someone who has always spoken English." She looked at him directly. She had a way of doing this, giving a conversation her full attention in a way that people noticed because most people, even when they were ostensibly listening, had a portion of themselves somewhere else. "That's a specific goal," she said. "Yes." "Why that specifically?" He was quiet for a moment. Then he told her. Not everything, not the notebook, not the plan, but the taxi, the man, the Tuesday, the comment about junior secondary explaining the English. She listened without saying anything. "I understand," she said when he was done. And she genuinely did, which was different from people who said they understood as a social courtesy. "Can you help?" he said. "Yes," she said, "but it's going to require you to be uncomfortable. The way you speak English now is a habit. Habits don't change without discomfort. Are you okay with discomfort?" "I'm very okay with discomfort," Kofi said. She almost smiled. "When do you want to start?" "Now," he said. "We have 45 minutes before the cafe closes." They started now. What followed over the next 8 months was one of the more remarkable educational relationships either of them had experienced. Amma was a good teacher. She was exacting and honest, and she did not spare his feelings when his feelings would have gotten in the way of improvement. She corrected him in real time, something most teachers avoided because real-time correction is uncomfortable for both parties. And she made him repeat things until they sounded right, and she had an ear for the specific hesitations in his speech that revealed where the uncertainty lived. But Kofi was, and this was the thing that turned the arrangement from a tutoring relationship into something more interesting. Kofi was extraordinary as a student. Not because he was naturally talented at English. He was not. He had specific deficits of pronunciation habits from Twi that he had to consciously override grammatical patterns from his village schooling that required active unlearning. These were real challenges, and they took real time. What made him extraordinary was the application. He treated English the way he drove, with the focused, careful attention of someone who understands that the difference between good and bad is not talent. It is practice maintained beyond the point where most people stop practicing. He had the radio on every night. He listened to English podcasts on his phone. He shadowed the speech patterns of BBC presenters until 2 in the morning. He kept a vocabulary notebook and added 15 words a week, and used each one in a sentence until it was lodged properly. He also, and Amma noticed this specifically, listened to her. Not just to the lessons, to everything. She would mention something, a thought about a book she was reading, an observation about a GIMPA lecture, a comment about how property markets worked that came from a business case study, and she could see him receiving it. Not just hearing, receiving, filing, using it. It was this quality, this specific total attention that made her realize, somewhere around their 3rd month of sessions, that she was not simply tutoring him in English. She was talking to someone remarkable. And somewhere in that realization, something else was forming. Kofi noticed too. He had not been expecting this. He had come to the tutoring arrangement with a very specific goal: improve the English, execute the plan. The plan did not have a romantic subplot in its first draft. The plan was lean and practical and timeline dependent. But Amma she was someone he had not encountered before. He had met smart people. He had met people who worked hard. He had not met someone who was simultaneously both of those things and also funny in the particular dry way that required you to be paying attention to catch it, and who gave things her full attention in a way that made you feel in her presence, genuinely seen. He did not say any of this for a long time. He said it eventually. They had been working for 5 months and his English had genuinely transformed. It was not perfect, but it was fluent now, confident in a way it had never been, the accent softer without being erased, the grammar correct, the vocabulary expanding rapidly. He had started implementing the second part of the plan, which we will come to. But on an evening in April, after a session in which she had pushed him on a specific type of formal business communication, email structure, the language of proposals, he had closed his notebook and he had said, without rehearsing it, "I like you." She looked at him. "I know," she said. A pause. "Is that all?" he said. "I like you too," she said. "I have for about 3 months. I was waiting for you to say it because you needed to be focused and I didn't want to be a distraction." He stared at her. "You knew for 3 months and said nothing." "Your English needed work," she said. He laughed, a genuine full laugh. The first time she had heard him laugh that way, unguarded, completely present. "Your priorities," he said, "are very strange." "My priorities," she said, "are well ordered. The English was the priority. The English is much better now." He reached across the table and took her hand. She let him. "What is the priority now?" he said. "Tell me the full plan," she said. "You've been working on something, I can tell. Tell me all of it." He told her. He told her everything: the notebook, the real estate idea, the commission structure he had been researching, the clients he had been cultivating from the taxi, the specific relationships he had been building over 7 months of airport runs and East Legon fares. He told her the timeline. He told her the target. She listened to all of it without interrupting, which was unusual because she was, in general, a person who interrupted when she had a thought and the thought was good. This time she did not interrupt. She listened completely. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "You've already started," she said. "3 months ago," he said. "The taxi is a prospecting vehicle, not a transport vehicle." "Yes." "And you've been practicing the property pitch on clients while simultaneously improving your English using the same conversations." "Yes." She looked at him. "Kofi," she said, "you are either going to be very successful or you are going to be very successful in a slightly different way than you planned. Which do you think?" She considered it seriously. "I think," she said, "that you understand something most people your age don't understand, which is that information is available everywhere if you are willing to listen. And I think your experience of having very little has given you a relationship with opportunity that people who have never had very little don't have." She paused. "And I think your English is now good enough." "Good enough for what?" he said. "To close your first deal," she said. The first client was a man named Mr. Apangaser. He was 53. He was in finance asset management specifically, which Kofi had learned from a series of airport conversations over 7 months, and which he had filed under person with money to invest in property. Mr. Apangaser had gotten into Kofi's taxi 3 times in 4 months, going to or from Kotoka. He was the kind of consistent airport traveler who used the same taxi service because reliability mattered more to him than variety. On the 3rd trip, Kofi had moved. Not dramatically. He had waited until they were well clear of the airport and into the A and C Mall Road, and he had said, in English that was now genuinely fluent, in a voice that was now genuinely steady, "Mr. Apangaser, may I ask you something?" The man had looked up from his phone. He was slightly surprised. The taxi had been quiet for a year, and this was the first time the driver had initiated a substantive conversation. "Yes. You've mentioned a few times that you're looking at property investments around East Legon and Trasaco Valley. I have some information about a listing that I think would be relevant to you." A pause. "You're a property agent," Mr. Apangaser said. "I'm learning the market," Kofi said, "but what I have is specific and I think it's worth 5 minutes of your time." Another pause. Mr. Apangaser was a man who made decisions. He recognized from experience that the quality of information was not correlated with the source. He had heard good things from unexpected places before. "Talk," he said. Kofi talked. He described a property, a 4-bedroom house in a gated East Legon community that he had learned about through a conversation with a seller's representative who had mentioned it during an airport run 3 weeks earlier. The price, the condition, the comparable sales in the area, the developer's track record with the community. He had spent 3 nights researching every detail he could find through public records, word of mouth, and 3 separate follow-up calls he had made to the development's office under the guise of an interested buyer. He knew everything there was to know about this property. Mr. Apangaser did not say anything during the presentation. When Kofi finished, he was quiet for a moment. "How old are you?" he said. 18, Kofi said. Another pause. "Do you have a number for the listing?" Mr. Apangaser said. Kofi had 3. He gave them to him. Mr. Apangaser called one of the numbers while still in the back of the taxi. He made an appointment for the following week. He said thank you to Kofi when he got out. That property sold 7 weeks later. Kofi was not the formal agent. He was too young, too new, not registered. But he had arranged an introduction that led to the sale, and the registered agent, a woman named Mrs. Keeson, who had agreed to the arrangement after Kofi approached her with a proposal, paid him a referral fee, not the full commission, a portion. It was the most money Kofi had ever held in his hand at one time. He put it in his pocket and he drove back to Uncle Boateng's workshop, and he sat on his mattress and he looked at the money and he said, out loud, to nobody, "First one." He called Amma. She said, "I knew." He said, "You couldn't have known." She said, "I knew from the moment you told me about the airport runs. This was always going to work. The English was the only real question." He said it was a referral fee, not even a full commission. "Yes," she said. "And what do you get when you do referral after referral until you have enough to get properly registered?" "A track record in capital," he said. "And what do you do with the capital?" "Get the suit," he said. She was quiet for a moment. "Get the suit," she agreed. The suit was the next piece. He had understood something from listening, from watching, from the 7 months of accumulated education that the taxi had given him, that the property world he was entering operated significantly on presentation. Not exclusively. Results mattered more than anything else, but presentation was the door. Without it, he was a taxi driver with property information. With it, he was someone worth taking a meeting with. He spent 3 weeks finding the right suit. Not from a market, he had graduated from the market for this specific item. He went to 3 tailors and described what he needed. Professional, classic, the kind of suit that a person wore to a business meeting when they needed the suit to communicate. This person is serious. He paid for it with a portion of the referral fee. He wore it for the first time and stood in front of the small mirror in Uncle Boateng's workshop, and he looked at himself, and he felt something he had not felt before. Not confidence exactly, something more specific, credibility. The feeling that the gap between where he was and where he was going had narrowed slightly. Amma saw the suit for the first time at a cafe meeting, and she said, immediately and without performance, "That works." "It's just a suit," he said. "Nothing is just anything," she said. "That suit is you saying something about yourself before you open your mouth. Make sure what comes out of your mouth when you open it is equal to what the suit said." He was equal to it. The referrals began to come. Not fast, slowly at first. The way things that are done properly are slow. He was meticulous. Every property he proposed, he knew completely. Every buyer he introduced, he had assessed for fit. He did not make introductions that wasted people's time because he understood from the taxi, from listening, from the accumulated education of someone who paid attention. That time was the thing wealthy people most resented having wasted. He got registered as a formal property agent at 19 through a partnership with Mrs. Keeson's agency, through which he operated under her license while building toward his own. He was, formally, a junior agent. In practice, within 6 months, he was generating more leads and more closed deals than anyone else in the small agency. His English, by this point, was not the English of a boy who had grown up in a village. It was the English of someone who had spent a year studying it with obsessive intensity and then applying it daily in high-stakes professional interactions. The accent was still there, a trace of it. Specifically, the quality of it that Amma had told him once was not a flaw. "It makes you memorable," she had said. "People remember a voice that has character. You want to be memorable. You want them, after the meeting, to tell their colleague about the agent they met. A voice with character gets remembered." He believed her. He stopped trying to erase the last trace of it. He was 19 and a half when the number changed. He had been tracking his total commissions, keeping it in the notebook that had started the whole thing, the running total at the back page. The amounts had been growing. The first referral fee had been modest, the next larger again as his deals became larger and his clients became more significant. He had moved from residential referrals to commercial introductions. He had been in meetings with developers, with foreign investors, with the kind of people who, a year ago, had been in the back seat of his taxi and had no idea they were talking to someone who was studying them. The night the total passed 500,000 cedis, he sat on the mattress in Uncle Boateng's workshop, the same mattress he had come to at 17 with one bag and a borrowed phone, and he looked at the number for a long time. He called his parents in Akyem. His mother answered. The background noise of the village, the particular ambient sound that was the constant background of his childhood, was audible behind her voice. "Kofi," she said. Her voice always changed when she heard his voice. It did the specific thing that a parent's voice does for a child it is anxious about. "Mama," he said, "I need to tell you something." He told her the number. She was silent for a long moment. "Say that again," she said. He said it again. "Kofi?" Her voice had changed to something he had not heard before, a quality that was beyond what her usual warmth contained. "I want to come home this weekend," he said. "I want to tell Papa in person." He went home. He told his father in the small house in Akyem, sitting on the wooden bench as he always had, his father in the only proper chair, his mother on the kitchen stool, the same configuration as the conversation about school fees. His father looked at him for a long time after he said the number. Then he said, "You did this yourself?" "Yes," Kofi said, "with help, but yes." His father nodded, the same nod as the conversation about school fees, but completely different. That nod had been the nod of a man accepting difficulty. This was the nod of a man being proven right about something he had always believed. "Good," his father said. His mother cried. She was not someone who cried easily. The farming life did not encourage it, but she cried now, quietly, with her hands over her face. Kofi held her. He drove back to Accra. And then he accelerated. The man who had commented about his English was named. Kofi had learned eventually through the particular small world of Accra's prosperous communities, Kwame Asidu. He was a corporate lawyer. He lived in the Labon area. He was, by most measures, successful. Kofi did not think about Kwame Asidu often. He had, over the 14 months since the Tuesday in October, entirely outgrown the specific wound that Kwame Asidu had inadvertently opened. The wound had healed not into scar tissue, but into something better. The particular smooth strength of a person who has taken the thing that was supposed to diminish them and used it as material. But he thought about the street. Not Kwame Asidu's specific street. The idea of the street. The kind of street where Kofi had driven as a taxi driver. The kind of street that existed in every major African city as a physical embodiment of which version of the world you occupied. The street he had driven past and understood without words was not for him. He had been working toward a specific address for 7 months. It was a street in East Legon, a residential road that had, over the previous decade, transitioned from middle class to affluent as the area around it developed. It had 12 properties. Several were owner-occupied. Several were rented. One was commercial, a small office building with a ground-floor retail unit. Kofi had been researching every property on this street for 7 months. He knew who owned them. He knew what they had paid. He knew which owners were open to selling. This he had learned through conversations with agents, with the property records, with the specific intelligence-gathering operation that his taxi had originally been, and that his agency work had now expanded. He had also, in those 7 months, been preparing the capital. His commissions had been accumulating with the discipline of someone who had watched his parents manage money at the household scale and who had applied the same principles to a much larger number. He had not spent extravagantly. He had lived in Uncle Boateng's workshop room. He had offered to pay rent. Uncle Boateng had refused. Kofi had found other ways to contribute, and he had not upgraded his life ahead of his plan. He was 20 years old, and he was ready. The acquisition of the East Legon Street was not done all at once. It was done in a sequence that Kofi had planned over many months, working with two lawyers, one of whom was a client he had brought to Mrs. Keeson's agency, who had become a professional contact who respected his approach, and with a financing structure that he had designed with input from Mr. Apangaser, who had become something that started as a client and evolved over months into something like a mentor. "You don't need to buy everything outright," Mr. Apangaser had told him, over dinner in a restaurant in Accra, a dinner that Kofi had requested, and at which he had arrived in the suit, and at which he had laid out his full plan with the precision and thoroughness that had become his professional signature. Property is one of the few asset classes where leverage is not just acceptable, it's expected. What you need is the first few properties as foundation. From there, the portfolio finances the portfolio. "What about the risk?" Kofi said. "There is always risk," Mr. Apangaser said. "The question is whether you understand the risk better than the risk understands itself. Do you?" Kofi thought about it. "I know every property on that street," he said. "I know the condition, the current value, the rental yield, the development trajectory of the neighborhood, and I know 3 of the 12 owners are ready to sell in the next 18 months. Mr. Apangaser looked at him. "You know 3 owners personally," he said. "I drove 2 of them to the airport," Kofi said, "and the 3rd I met through a referral introduction I made 8 months ago." A long pause. "You've been planning this specifically," Mr. Apangaser said. "It was not a question." "For 14 months, Kofi said. Mr. Apangaser sat with this. He was 53. He had been in finance for 25 years. He had seen a great many young people with plans. He could count on one hand the number who had plans with this level of specificity. "I'll introduce you to someone," he said. "You'll need more firepower than what you currently have for the full acquisition. There is a structure that can work." The structure worked. It took 8 months to acquire the first 6 properties. Through a combination of direct purchase with his accumulated capital, a property acquisition loan arranged through the contact Mr. Apangaser provided, and in one case, a seller financing arrangement that Kofi negotiated directly with an owner who was more interested in a structured payment than a lump sum. 6 properties in 8 months. Each one documented thoroughly, each one inspected personally, each one valued independently before he moved. The remaining 6 followed over the next 4 months, as the word spread, in the specific way that word spreads in affluent communities where people talk to each other about everything, that someone was systematically acquiring properties on this particular East Legon Street, and was doing so with the thoroughness and professionalism of someone much older and more experienced than he was. On the day he acquired the last property, the commercial building, the most complex of the 12, Kofi was in the lawyer's office at 11 in the morning. He signed the final documents. He shook hands with the seller, an older man who looked at him with the specific expression that people give someone whose age and achievement are in a surprising relationship. "How old are you?" the man asked. 20, Kofi said. The man shook his head slowly, not negatively, with the particular movement of someone receiving information they find genuinely surprising. 20, he repeated. Kofi walked out of the lawyer's office into the Accra afternoon. He stood on the pavement. He took his phone out and he called Amma. She answered on the second ring. "It's done," he said. A pause. "All 12, she said. "All 12, he said. She was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice had the quality that he had learned to recognize, not her usual precise, controlled manner. This was the version of her voice that came out when something had landed completely. "Kofi," she said. "Yes. You bought the whole street." "I bought the whole street." He could hear her breathing for a moment. "Come home," she said. "I'll make jollof." He laughed. "Okay," he said. He called his parents next. His mother cried again. His father said, "Good," again, but this time the word was bigger. The mansion was designed by an architect that Kofi had also met through the taxi. This particular connection had come from a conversation 2 years earlier with an interior designer going to Kotoka, who had mentioned her architect husband in passing, whose number Kofi had noted and kept. The architect was 40, Ghanaian trained, with a portfolio of modern luxury residential projects that were exactly the aesthetic Kofi had been imagining. He met with him and described what he wanted. "For whom?" the architect asked. "For my parents," Kofi said, "my girlfriend and me." "What's the brief?" Kofi described it. Not a house that announced its wealth ostentatiously, not something that shouted, something that said quietly, in the language of quality and space and light and material, that the person who built this understood what luxury was and had earned the right to it. His parents' suite on the ground floor, with direct garden access for his mother because she would want to grow things, with windows that let in the morning light because his father had spent 40 years rising before dawn and would rise before dawn here too, and he wanted him to rise to something beautiful. Amma's design preferences, which he knew in detail because they had discussed them in the way that people who are genuinely in love discuss things they plan to share, throughout the main living areas. His own study, a room with one wall of books, he had been accumulating them, and a desk at the window, and the specific quality of quiet that he had never had in any room he had ever occupied, because the rooms he occupied never had the silence that thick walls and good windows could provide. And in the entrance hallway, visible when you came through the front door, a framed photograph. Not a portrait, not an achievement award. A photograph he had taken himself from his phone months earlier, on a day when he had gone back to the specific spot at the Kotoka airport where he used to park the rented taxi and wait for fares. The photograph was of the road where he had waited, the road where, if you were in the right position, you could see the kind of street that was not for you. He was going to put it in the entrance hallway of his mansion, so that when he came home, every single time he would see it. The taxi fleet was the last piece, or not the last, the first piece of what came after, because buying the street and building the mansion was not in Kofi's accounting and ending. It was a capital event. It was the moment when the life he had been building became visible. What it actually was a platform. He called Mr. Asante. "I have a proposition," he said. Mr. Asante said, "You always have a proposition." "This one you'll like," Kofi said. "I want to buy your taxis." A very long pause. "All of them," Mr. Asante said. "All 5, Kofi said, "and then 15 more, and I want to offer you the management contract." Another pause. "You want to own the taxis," Mr. Asante said slowly, "and have me manage them like you used to drive for me." "Exactly like I used to drive for you," Kofi said, "except the revenue goes the other way." Mr. Asante made a sound that was, Kofi listened carefully, the sound of a man encountering something that was both entirely logical and completely unexpected. "You're 20 years old," Mr. Asante said. "I know," Kofi said. "I get that a lot." He heard Mr. Asante do something he had not heard him do in 3 years. Laugh. A full, genuine laugh. "Come to the office," Mr. Asante said. "Let me see the numbers." Kofi came with the numbers. The numbers were right. They were always right when Kofi brought them, because Kofi did not bring numbers that were not right. He had learned this from his mother's kitchen table, where the numbers had to be right because being wrong about the numbers meant not eating. He had learned it from the taxi's daily accounting. He had learned it from a 1.5 years of property transactions, where a miscalculation was a significant financial event. The deal was done in a week. He bought all 5 of Mr. Asante's vehicles. He immediately expanded to 15. The expansion was funded partly from property income. He had retained 2 of the East Legon properties as rentals, and partly from a small business loan he negotiated with the specific thoroughness of someone who knows how to present a plan. He hired 12 drivers. He paid them better than Mr. Asant's rate. He paid them better because he had been a driver and he understood what the rate felt like when the day was slow. And he had decided, not sentimentally but practically, that drivers who were paid properly drove better, maintained vehicles better, retained clients better, and generated better reviews. The math worked. He set up a dispatch system. He set up an account for corporate clients' businesses that needed reliable airport transport. He positioned it not as a taxi service, but as a business travel solution, which was the same thing dressed in the language of the market he was targeting. Within 6 months, the fleet had 12 corporate accounts. Within a year, he had 40 vehicles and was in discussions with 2 Accra hotels for preferred ground transportation partnerships. He was 21 when the travel started. Amma had finished her GIMPA qualification. She had, with Kofi's support but on her own considerable merit, been accepted into a postgraduate program in business management at a university in the United Kingdom that she had wanted to attend for 3 years. She deferred it for 1 semester because she had some things to finish in Accra. Then she went. Kofi met her there. He flew first class, not because he needed to make a point about it, but because he had calculated that on a 9-hour flight he wanted to arrive in a state where he could be present for the person he was arriving to see, and first class was the infrastructure that made that possible. He landed in London on a November morning. The same month, the same gray of an autumn morning, but this November was different from the November in Akyem when he was born, from the November in Accra when the man in the back seat had laughed at his English. This November, he walked through the airport with the easy movement of a person who was used to airports. He took a taxi. He always noticed taxis now, assessed them automatically, the habit of 3 years never quite gone, to the tube station, and then across the city to Amma's accommodation. She opened the door. She was in a University of London sweatshirt and her hair was different. She had cut it shorter, London length, and she was looking at him with the full attention that was the thing he loved most about her. "You're here," she said. "I'm here," he said. She took his hand and pulled him inside. They spent a week in London. He had meetings, he had, from the taxi days, understood that travel was not separate from work, but was the medium in which a certain kind of work happened, and he had arranged 3 meetings with property investors who operated across West Africa, contacts of Mr. Apangaser who had agreed to introductions. The meetings were good. 2 of them led to ongoing conversations that would, over the next year, result in significant collaborative deals. But most of the week was simply them. In a city that did not know either of them, in which neither of them was a taxi driver or a GIMPA student or a young property agent who had bought a whole street, in which they were simply 2 people from Ghana who were in love and had gotten somewhere and who had a week to be in a foreign city together, and to remember that the plan had always been, underneath the English lessons and the suit and the notebook and the commissions, to build something that made space for this, for them. They went to museums. Amma knew the city better and she led. Kofi observed everything with the complete attention of someone in an unfamiliar place, which is to say, he learned the city in a week in a way that most people don't learn it in a month. On the last evening, they ate at a restaurant she had chosen, a West African restaurant in Peckham, because she said it was important to remember where you were from even when you were somewhere else. They ate jollof rice that was good but not as good as hers, and they talked about the future with the easy specificity of 2 people who have already demonstrated, to each other and to themselves, that the plans they make tend to materialize. "What next?" she said. He thought about it. "The street is the beginning," he said, "not the end. There are 6 more streets I've identified in 2 more cities, and the fleet needs to expand into intercity routes." "What else?" He looked at her across the table. "I want to go home," he said. "Before the next thing, I want to take my parents to the mansion. I want them to see what we built." She smiled. "Oui," she said. "The English," he said. She laughed. "I want to go to Akyem," he continued. "The school there, the one I went to, I want to build them a proper library, proper books, not missing pages." She looked at him, the full attention look that he had first noticed in a cafe near GIMPA, and that had not reduced in 3 years. "Done," she said. "And then," he said, "I want to do this again somewhere further." "Further than London." "Further than London," he said. "I want to see everything. I want us to see everything. We worked very hard for something. I want us to spend some of it." She reached across the table and took his hand. "Okay," she said. "Okay." "Kofi," she said, and this was the thing she said occasionally, his name with the tone that was not emphasis but was something else, the tone that meant, "I see you completely and I choose you completely. Yes, we see everything." They flew back to Accra 3 days later. The mansion was nearly complete. The architect sent him a photograph the morning they landed. The entrance hallway, finished, the photograph of the airport road in its frame on the wall. He sent the photograph to his parents. His mother replied, "When do we come?" He replied, "This weekend." He drove to Akyem on Saturday morning. He drove himself in his own car, not a rental, his own, the kind of car that he had looked at as a boy on a trip to Kumasi and understood was from a different world. He drove it through the same roads he had taken the bus on, past the same landmarks, into the same village. He picked his parents up outside their house. His mother was in her church wrapper. His father was in his good shirt. They had dressed as if they were going somewhere important. They were. He drove them to Accra. His mother held her hands in her lap the whole way and looked at everything they passed with the expression of someone receiving a great deal of information quickly. His father looked out the window and said very little, which was his way of paying very close attention. He drove them to the street. He parked outside the gate of the mansion. He said, "We're here." His mother got out first. She looked at the gate. She looked at the wall. She looked up at the house, visible behind the wall, the scale of it, the quality of it. She said nothing. Kofi opened the gate. His parents walked through. His mother stopped in the compound. She looked at the garden. She would have the garden. He had told the architect this, and the garden was ready for her, planted with things she could tend and things that would make food and things that would bloom in the morning when she rose before dawn to start her day, because she had risen before dawn every morning of her adult life and would rise before dawn here too. She walked into the garden. She crouched down and touched the earth. She stayed there for a moment. Then she stood up. She looked at the house. She looked at Kofi. "Your father and I," she said, "gave everything we had so that you could have something. We didn't know this was coming." "I know," Kofi said. "We didn't know," she said again, "but we hoped." "I know," he said. His father came to stand beside his mother. He put his hand on her shoulder. He looked at the house. "You did this," he said, to Kofi. His voice was level and private in the way it was always level and private. "Yes," Kofi said. "Yourself." "With help," Kofi said, "but yes." His father looked at the house for a long moment. "Your grandfather," he said, "worked this same land his whole life, his father before him." He paused. They would not believe this. Kofi stood beside his father, and they both looked at the house. "I need to tell you something, Papa," Kofi said, "about why I built it here in Accra, in this specific area." His father waited. "A man laughed at me," Kofi said. 2 years ago in my taxi, he laughed at my English." His father was quiet. "I thought about it for a long time," Kofi said. "I was angry, and then I understood something. He didn't give me anything except a moment, and in that moment I made a decision. That's not his achievement, that's mine." His father nodded. "The anger," Kofi said, "was fuel, but I didn't burn anything down with it. I used it to build." His father put his hand on Kofi's shoulder. Your mother and I, he said, we gave you everything we could. I know, Kofi said. We thought it wasn't enough, his father said. It was enough, Kofi said. It was exactly enough. They stood together in the compound of the mansion on the East Legon Street. The street that had been for other people. The street that was now, irrevocably and legally and in every possible sense, his. There is a photograph in the entrance hallway of a mansion in East Legon, Accra. It is a photograph of a road. The road outside Kotoka International Airport where, for several months, a boy in a rented taxi with worn shoes and improving English used to wait for fares, used to carry people who had things, used to listen. The boy is not in the photograph. He is behind it, he took it, which is why you cannot see him. But if you know the story, you can feel him there. The 18-year-old with the notebook and the plan and the particular fuel of a person who has been underestimated in the specific way that makes you decide, all the way down, what you are actually made of. There are 12 properties on an East Legon Street. All of them belong to one person. There is a taxi fleet, 40 vehicles growing, 12 corporate accounts, 2 hotel partnerships. The drivers are paid properly. This was decided on principle and happens to also be good business. There is a library in the primary school in Akyem Village, 23 kilometers outside Kumasi, with complete books whose pages are all present. There is a garden in the mansion compound where a 60-year-old woman rises before dawn every morning and tends the earth with the hands that spent 40 years on a farm, and that find, in this new soil, the same conversation. There is a 63-year-old man who sits in a proper chair by a window that lets in the morning light and reads the newspaper with the particular stillness of a person whose nervous system has, for the first time, been given permission to rest. There is a young woman who finished her postgraduate program and came back to Accra and is building something of her own, a business education consultancy that works with young people from communities like Akyem and gives them what she gave Kofi, the specific skill of communication, without which all the ideas in the world stay only ideas. And there is a 21-year-old sitting in a first-class seat on a flight to somewhere neither of them has been before, a window to his left and the woman he loves to his right, and below them the continent they are from, which is full of streets that seem to say, "This is not for you." But he knows something about those streets now. He knows that the message is not fixed. He knows that what looks like a permanent fact is often just a current condition, that conditions change, that conditions can be changed, that the distance between the back seat and the owner is not measured in talent or luck or even, exactly, in money. It is measured in the quality of attention you bring to the moments you have been given, including the moments that were supposed to hurt you. Especially those. If you are watching this right now and someone has told you, with a laugh, with a comment, with a look, with any of the 1,000 ways that people communicate that you do not belong somewhere. Let me tell you what Kofi Mensah knew at 18 years old in a parked taxi outside a Labona address. They did not give you a wound, they gave you information. The information is, this is where you are, not where you will be. What you do next is up to you. The street is available, go and buy it. This has been Tribal Tales Hub. If this story lit something in you, if Kofi's story reminded you of your own, or someone you know, or something you are still becoming like this video, it costs you nothing and it tells us that these stories matter. Subscribe to Tribal Tales Hub. Ring the notification bell. We are going to keep telling stories like this one, stories about people who were told the ceiling was lower than it is and who went up anyway. Comment below, tell us, what is the thing that was supposed to be your limitation and became your fuel? Tell us. The comment section is for stories like yours. Share this video. Send it to the person in your life who is sitting in the taxi right now, listening, planning. Tell them we see them. This is Tribal Tales Hub, We will see you in the next story.